Session with prayer. Father Stephen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Holy, I beseech thee, O Lord, that the fiery and sweet strength of thy love may absorb my soul from all things under heaven, that I may die for love of your love, as you deigned to die for the love of Mylar. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mary, Queen of Apostles,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
And a very warm welcome to those of you who have arrived recently. And there's just a few things that I'd like to say before we start having the talks. And those of you who haven't registered, after the talks on obedience, we'll have a break, and you'll be able to register at the table then. Mary Long and Jean will take care of you. And on timing, as far as the talks are concerned, when 18 minutes are up, Nuncia Fischelli will stand and wave a little card, a yellow card, to indicate that you have 2 more minutes to go. And during those 2 minutes, we would like you to conclude your talk. Now, if your talk is longer, that's perfectly all right, because in the proceedings, the whole thing may be put in the proceedings. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker in the afternoon session, and the first talks will be on obedience. Miss Dorothy Clemens of Caritas Christi is from Cincinnati, Ohio. She got her BA in Mount St. Joseph's College in Mount St. Joseph, Ohio, and her Master's in Library Science at the University of Illinois Graduate School of Laboratory Science. She also studied at CU. And Dorothy is a branch librarian at Hyde Park branch of Cincinnati Public System. She is a member of Caritas Christi since 1955 and is the acting national sponsor for Caritas Christi. Dorothy Clemens.
Thank you for the introduction. Reverend Fathers and fellow dedicated members, this group has grown quite a bit since this morning, so I don't know whether that's good or bad. As you know, I'm going to talk on obedience, and I have broken it down into my paper into 3 parts. First, the introduction, which will be on obedience in general in secular institutes, and it's going to be very short because of the time element. I will talk about the spirit animating obedience in Caritas Christi, and finally, the observance of obedience in our institute. If thou wilt be perfect, go sell what thou hast and give to the poor, and come follow me. This is the invitation to perfection given to us by God, first by our baptism, and secondly, and more profoundly, by our consecration or dedication to God through our membership in a secular institute. As you know, secular institutes are the work of the Holy Spirit. Our late Holy Father, Pope Pius XII, has said so. They have been erected into a state of perfection whereby the members can attain more effectively that end of all human life, which is the life of God. The state of perfection exists solely for the perfection of love, and any individual entering into this state is bound to tend to the perfection of charity by taking the appropriate means. And these means are principally the evangelical counsels. This paper will deal with obedience, which spiritual writers and theologians regard as more excellent than chastity and poverty. Why does obedience, which reaches prominence rather slowly, hold such a high place in the life of perfection? Because it is a royal gift of freedom. It means docility, submission to another for the love of God. By obedience, one renounces one's own will and finds the means of accomplishing the will of God. The religious life, it is certain, is a state well adapted to the total life of obedience. The question is, can this obedience be found in secular institutes? Provida Mater Ecclesia states, by vow or promise of obedience, so that bound by a firm bond, they dedicate themselves solely to God and to the works of charity or the apostolate, and that in all things they remain morally under the authority and guidance of superiors, according to the constitutions. Here we see laid down, and I quote, the necessity for a morally continuous authority and guidance on the part of superiors, for without this there would be no institute. The words used in Pravida Mater Ecclesia, however, leave room for all the special purposes of each institute. Are the members left free to live a life according to their whims? Are they not to have the advantage of being dependent on God's good pleasure? The words, bound by a firm bond, reveal a genuine incorporation into a community. The members of a secular institute belong to themselves no more than do religious, but the practice of the counsels of obedience and poverty will be subject to many variations according to the specifically secular nature of the institute, to the different types of institutes, and to the diversity of vocations in each institute. What, for the members of Caritas Christi, animates the desire to take on the observance of this counsel? Our founder, Father J.M. Perrin, O.P., in meditating on the obedience of Christ as it is depicted in the Gospels and in the writings of St. Paul, found Caritas Christi's lay form of obedience and the means of drawing from the example of Christ all the advantages of humility, gentleness, and fraternal charity. Christ was obedient to Mary and Joseph. His first words were, "I must be about my Father's business." His obedience to his Father brought him to death, even death on a cross. And Christ himself says, "Not everyone that says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father who is in heaven." We see in this that true love consists in doing the will of God. Perfect love lies in clinging so closely to him that there remains but one will for both. One of the most strongly emphasized features of spiritual formation and life in Caritas Christi is this self-abandonment to the will of God. The fiat of its members' dedication, by putting on their lips the words of Our Lady, "Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to thy word," signifies clearly this surrender to the divine will and the total response to his love. There is no longer then the secular side and the religious side of life, the exterior and the interior. There is no longer even the personal will, but only God's will to be accomplished, as it manifests itself in every event of the day, the call of charity, the duties of one's state of life and profession. This life, then, lived by the laywoman, is in reality unified and fulfilled. Unified because it seeks nothing but God's will, fulfilled because it contains God and in him is hidden in the church. Now for the practical application. This is the spirit that animates us. What constitutes for us the observance of the counsel of obedience? First of all, the members of Caritas Christi fulfill their promise of obedience by living according to the constitutions in the spirit of obedience, seeking neither to gratify their own tastes nor to do their own will, but rather in everything to do their Lord's will out of love. And I cite our Article 79 of Lex Vitae, which incidentally translated is our rule of life. We see in all its importance that the member's first requirement is to live according to the constitutions, which require that the whole life of the members be permeated with the spirit of obedience, especially in absolute faithfulness to God's commands, perfect submission to all the laws of the church, acceptance in all its precise meaning of all that happens in the life of the member by God's will and permission, and finally, the fulfillment of the duties of the member's state of life as perfectly as possible. This implies obedience to all superiors, spiritual as well as temporal. And again, I cite Article 80. Specifically, and in the absolute demand of the donation or dedication in Caritas Christi, the members must first organize their interior and apostolic life according to the constitutions and carry out what the rule prescribes, or ask in all simplicity for dispensations when these are necessary. Dispensations are an act of authority dispensing from an application of the law. Article 12 states, and I quote, "Within the limits provided by the constitutions, the sponsors will have no hesitation in granting those dispensations that the health and particular circumstances of any member may require, so that it may be possible to harmonize faithfulness to the rule. Close contact with the sponsor and seeking her advice are required by the rule in order that the decisions and reactions may comply with the ideal of the vocation. These furnish the opportunity of entering into God's point of view and give the occasion to renounce self-love. In points 4 and 5 above, and point 4 was to obey the sponsor exactly in extraordinary circumstances, which might change their lives or put the vocation in danger, and also to submit in true obedience to any apostolic work. Mention was made of the members being bound in conscience to obey their sponsor. An example of such permanent care of an invalid or adopting a child, living or working or even vacationing in an environment which would be dangerous to faith or morals and therefore to the vocation. The need for obeying the sponsor in these cases clearly points out the seriousness of the dedication and that authority is meant to serve it and derives all its powers from it. In all this we see the great importance of the sponsor in the organization of the Institute. She is the link in the community. To her is entrusted the task of helping each member realize her personal vocation. Her role is to give instruction and spiritual formation based on the Lex Vitae, to support, to give counsel, and to serve as a channel through which the life of the Institute may circulate and animate each and every member. Whence comes this authority, this power of binding, even in conscience in some cases? Every form of authority, and I'm quoting now from one of our assembly reports, every form of authority in any society, whether cleric or religious, comes from God and is intended for the common good. As regards the church and her supernatural rule, every power residing in her exists only insofar as it is delegated by Christ. Every mandate in the church derives from this delegation and is carried out in communion with it. As in any authority, the Institute must have its authorities. It is the very consequence of its organization. This organization is necessary that our vocation and the spirit that animates it may be lived not in isolation with individualism's uncertainties and imperfections, but in community, so that this spirit may be passed on to others in space and time. Authority in the Institute is a mandate from the church. Mandate meaning to commit to one's charge, to put into one's hands. There are three elements in a mandate. First, the person who assigns the mandate. Secondly, the person who receives it. And thirdly, the powers and duties that are assigned. In accordance with the constitutions and by virtue of the Holy See's approval of them, the authority of the servant of the Union and all its office holders, as set forth in the constitutions, is a true mandate from the church. It must be stressed that this authority is exercised in accordance with the constitutions and within the limits they specify. The end towards which the sponsors must tend is found in Article 1 of the Lex Vitae, which is to form lay women and give them to God for the church. The authority given to the sponsor through the servant of the union is threefold. First, to maintain the spirit through a solid interior formation. Secondly, to establish a true community based on the same dedication, obligations, externals, personal obligations, and specific directives of the constitutions and the monthly examen. Third, to increase apostolic possibilities, that is, to serve the church better. All authority in Caritas Christi is to be characterized by a deep interior spirit, by the spirit of service, by fraternal love, and finally by a concern for order and organization, that unity may be facilitated. And in conclusion, I should say that Christ wished his disciples to have his own obedience. This is what St. Paul means when he declares, "Let this mind be in you which was in Christ Jesus." To follow Christ, to be God's helpers, implies the willingness to renounce self in order to be guided by him. But there is also the promise that through the renunciations of obedience, one will share in his work and accomplish with Christ the Father's work, and thus share in his glory.
Thank you for a very fine talk, Dorothy. It shows the order and organization. And our next speaker is Father McGrath. And since I don't have a biographical sketch, Father, would you tell us about yourself before you begin your talk?
The biographical sketch is a sketch. The most important event in my life was ordination to the priesthood in 1943. And the only other important event is the fact that I'm working for the good Lord, breaking up marriages in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. If there are any questions on that, we can take them up later. So we should get to the order of the day, since I noticed the schedule is already a bit behind. But I'm not going to talk quite the full length of time, so rest in peace. I'm supposed to talk on obedience as lived by the priest missionaries of the kingship of Christ through its constitution and rule. The dominant note in Christ's character is humility, expressed in his obedience. Surrender of his own will to the will of his heavenly Father. And that surrender was made manifest in his perfect obedience. I came to do the will of him who sent me, and again, I do always the things that please him. And the most eloquent expression he ever made of his obedience was his passion. Here we have the depths, the heart, and the soul of a religious life, humility expressed in perfect obedience. That is what the rule of life of a secular institute means. This is what is really promised by the vow of obedience. The very word obedience, however, revolts our appetites as emphatically as the mention of pork to a sick man. The objections to obedience are many and varied. One man is just as good as another. There is a certain ignobility in taking orders, a certain servility involved in being at the beck and the call of another man or woman. There is a certain irresponsibility involved in having someone else do our thinking. Or obedience shows a certain spinelessness in being unable to make up our own minds, and so on down the list. Now, how fine all of these arguments sound to our independent spirits, and yet we all know how utterly absurd they are. In our idle moments, we even go to the absurdity of trying to fashion in our minds what our superiors would be like or should be like, according to our ideas. So nice, so personable, so understanding, so kind, so gracious, and most important of all, so faultless. Even from a purely natural point of view, obedience is an absolute condition for harmony with the rest of the universe. All of nature follows the same rule of divine providence, namely that the inferiors are led to their goals by superiors. Men are not only equals, they are also unequals. Men have superiors and they move to their ends as all nature moves to its end by a precept whose answer is obedience. Obedience, then, is the moral virtue by which we obey the precept of our superiors from the intention of satisfying his precepts. Obedience is the perfect surrender of the soul manifested by service of the body, or, on the contrary, it can be called the living sacrifice. The living sacrifice of our bodily senses and the soul. Obedience is a voluntary death, a perfect self-defense with God. It is, in a word, the burial of the will, the arouser of humility. It is the surrender of our judgment to the infinite judgment. This sacrifice of the will is the supreme oblation because it gives to God our personality, our individuality, and our character. Obedience is not only a narrow path, walled in and hedged in on either side, but it is also a steep, laborious, and thorny path. In connection with obedience, we should bear in mind that superiors are not browbeaters nor slave masters. They are not to be looked on as our enemies, suppressors of liberties, and so on. Rather, we must see them somewhat as a child sees its parent, or as a man looks to God. But it must at the same time be remembered that these superiors are not God. Not infrequently, they may not even be good men. We give them reverence and subjection, not as God, not even as men, but as superiors. By reason of their official position, we give them honor. By reason of their coercive power, we give them fear. By reason of their directive office, we give them obedience. The struggle for sanctity is common to all of us. Christ made no exceptions. Be you therefore perfect. God's Eden is large and chock-a-block full of the flowers of holiness. Many and varied are the ways in which these flowers of holiness grow. Those present here now are striving for perfection through their association with secular institutes, that is, associations of clerics or lay persons whose members strive for Christian perfection and who devote themselves entirely to the apostolate. Though living in the world, they make profession of practicing the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Since the kind of life imposed on the members is in substance analogous to that of religious institutes and of societies of common life without public vows, secular institutes constitute a juridical state of perfection. Now, this paper is concerned only with the vow of obedience, hence our remarks limited to that area. Regarding the vow of obedience, the members are obliged to observe the constitutions. Of themselves, these regulations do not oblige under pain of sin. Yet the occasions will not be set in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is then the proper object of the vow. By the vow of obedience, the priest missionary obliges himself to obey most promptly and readily in all things his most reverent ordinary, even to the point of being a good example of obedience to his fellow diocesan priests. He is also obliged under pain of mortal sin to obey the superiors of the institute, the president, the delegate of the president, or the group leader, whenever a command is given in virtue of the vow of obedience, in a grave matter and within the limits of the constitutions. The obedience we give to any man is limited by the bounds of the subjection we owe him. A pastor, for example, decreeing what doctor his assistant must seek for treatment, has stepped outside of his field. He's a drum major playing Napoleon. If a superior goes beyond the limit of his authority, he would be exceeding his rights and the subject would not be bound to obey. Rules and constitutions limit the authority of the superior. According to the constitutions of the priest missionaries and of most, if not all, clerical secular institutes, whenever a conflict arises between the priest missionary's dependence on his ordinary and his membership in the institute, especially in matters representing the vows. The priest missionary will solve it by implicitly obeying his ordinary, informing, however, the superiors of the institute as soon as possible of the situation in which he finds himself. Every other command or order of the superiors obliges merely through the virtue of obedience and not through the vow. A virtue is the disposition to conform to the law of the right. That is, it is moral excellence or rectitude. Obedience, then, is a supernatural moral virtue which inclines us to submit our will to that of our lawful superiors insofar as they are representatives of God. To develop fully within himself the spirit of obedience, the priest missionary will faithfully observe the following. With the spirit of faith, he will willingly accept and carefully heed the counsels given to him by the superiors for his life of perfection. Second, he will foster within himself and encourage and diffuse in others respect, docility, and love for the vicar of Christ. And he will do all in his power to make the papal teachings known and loved. Third, he will show respect, docility, and love for his own ordinary, and he will promptly and generously obey whatever he commands in his life, activity, and apostolate as a member of the diocese. 4, he will, of course, in his work in the ministry in Catholic action and apostolic activity, depend on the ordinary and the directors appointed by him for the various diocesan organizations, and he will be exemplary in the spirit of discipline, endeavoring to foster it always in others. How, in practice, then, does the priest missionary fulfill the obligations he has assumed by the vow of obedience? He does this in the main by his exact fidelity to the norms of the secular institute. There is his daily prayer life, which, according to the norm of the Constitution, means giving at least 2 hours of his day to prayer, which, of course, may include his office, mass, etc. He obliges himself to spend some time each day in reading the sacred scriptures or other pious work. There is weekly confession, consultation with the spiritual director, the holy hour on the eve of the first Friday, the monthly day of recollection, deepening his knowledge of Franciscan spirituality, the striving to lead a life of union with Christ. The priest missionary strictly obeys his vow of poverty, by which he is bound to make an annual report of income and expenditures, and seeks the necessary permission to spend money in excess of a sum to be determined by the superiors. Among the priest missionaries of the kingship of Christ, there are not many items that come directly under the vow of obedience. That is not important. What is important, however, is that one develop the spirit of obedience, and that one realize that one's perfection consists in making himself as like to God as he can. To do this, one must seek God's will in all the events of his life. To imitate Christ, we are not asked to seek suffering, but we are asked to obey his will in all things, no matter what difficulties this obedience presents. Like our divine master and model, who became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross, we must do God's will and submit bravely to what he permits. This was the program of life Christ traced for himself. This, too, must be our martyrdom. Let this be our prayer. I know not what it is to doubt. My heart is ever gay. I run no risk, for come what will, thou, O Lord, always hast thy way. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Nebraska. Very fine talk. Now, is there any discussion from the floor?
You speak of the sponsor, the act like each one is responsible for one person. Do you have one overall lay superior?
Yes, we have what is known as the servant of the union. She is, well, Mother General in terminology of the religious life, and has her council. And the normal level of our organization is a diocesan group, and there is a diocesan group servant who is responsible for all the members in her group. And then
Is the sponsor of each one that group?
No, not necessarily. When we talk about the diocesan group, we are referring to a complete diocese. And in this diocese, as you have in religious communities, you have a superior of a house. We have centers. In other words, one or two parishes might be joined together, and there would be one servant, one sponsor. And she, in turn, would have other sponsors under her. A sponsor can be in charge of 2 or 3 or 5, as many people as would be in a center. But in the case where we would begin in a certain section, there would be an individual sponsor for each person.
It would be the sponsor would be the one who brought this person to the church.
No, it didn't bring her to. This is the one who forms her.
I see.
If someone is, of course, it comes back to a matter of discretion. And someone asks the question: if we saw a girl that we thought would be a member, would we approach this person? We don't. We get someone who knows us to talk to the girl, or literature is sent to her. And then, for instance, with us, the girl would write to Father Clancy, and Father would send the material, or the letters, or the information about the girl, to the various regional sponsors. And we are divided into 3 regions as of now. And the person then, a regional sponsor, would decide who should do the preparation, who should interview the girl, who should do the preparation of the girl. And it may be that the person that does the interviewing would also be appointed as the sponsor of preparation and perhaps the sponsor of formation. We have 3 groups of sponsors: those that do preparation work, those that do formation work, and those that are the sponsors of the formation.
How much information would a person need before she would get this preparation regime?
Well, it varies. Some people, some girls know a great deal about secular institutes. Some girls have been in religious life and have some
I
idea
mean,
of
the new person, the new candidate, how much would she know before you approach her with this preparation?
Well,
Does
that's,
she know anything about it at all?
you mean about Caritas Christi?
Well,
What we do in a case like a new inquirer, supposing that I would receive a letter for a girl in my section, I would write to her an introductory letter, letting her know that I am a member of Caritas Christi, and get some ideas of what she knows. She will write back and give me a resume of herself. Then we send our handbook to the girl, which states very clearly what we are, what our spirit is, and what our form of life is.
Is this after Father Clancy has?
Yes, Father Clancy writes to the girl, and if she continues to manifest interest, then he sends a letter out to each one of us. Yes,
The
Father?
sponsor who ultimately, who is the sponsor in that 3rd stage, is that a lifelong appointment?
Not necessarily, Father. A sponsor is appointed only for a year, and then may be reappointed.
Does the sponsor report to the servant of the union? Is that the?
No, this is the way it works. The individual sponsor will report, say, to the diocesan sponsor, and we have now 2 diocesan sponsors. Under this girl are 2 or 3 other sponsors. They report to the diocesan sponsor. The diocesan sponsor reports to the regional sponsor.
I see.
And then in the end, when it comes time for the dedication, a complete report must go to the servant of the union, who alone may admit to dedication.
Is that in this country?
Yes.
Sarah?
Regarding a practical aspect of obedience, we have to presume permissions. And that is, for instance, when a member of the company is away from the superior, and for different reasons he cannot contact the superior, then he accepts or rejects anything according to his own judgment. But that has to be done also according to what the superior would think about it, you know. That is used in the company. Now, I would like to know whether in other secular institutes they use presumed permissions.
We don't have anything like a permission. The idea of Caritas Christi is that the person is to be so formed that she will adopt she will get her answer from the constitutions first of all, and then it matters that.
Oh, as far as letting people know who belongs?
And yourself.
That I could tell someone else, you mean? Well, you're not supposed to disclose the...
I didn't make myself clear. No, what I meant was, would you explain to people here, I firmly believe in it myself, but it's that how this helps you to achieve the purpose as a member of the Institute, the discretion and the secrecy that is prescribed.
I'm afraid I don't
That
quite...
the actual silence that you maintain upon your own membership and other people's membership is actual aid in your apostolate.
Well, as I have pointed out before, you know, is the last thing that people like to talk about is spirituality. And I think that they'll do pretty nearly anything to camouflage it as a general rule. Because, after all, Christ in the gospel, wasn't it Christ himself who told us when you pray, don't be like the Pharisees, but go to your room and close the door. But again, no one wants to go out and before any group and say, I am a member of the Kingship of Christ group, and it's a secular institute, and my work is. It's as someone pointed out before we started here, sort of, I suppose, a fifth column in the church, which we can use very effectively in the work that you're doing.
The very fact that you're a priest sets you apart. I can see discretion for lay people, but you, by your very ordination, are set apart. People expect you to be holy. They expect you to be a witness. But lay people, right out in the field, really. And
You mean how...
that's why we maintain discretion, to aid the apostolate, but you are already an apostle.
Well, I would say this, that
Yeah.
I don't know now, I might be subject to correction on this, but I feel that for the diocesan priests, membership in a secular institute is, let's say, first to help him advance spiritually himself. And by that means, then, to convey spirituality to others. It is true that as priests we don't need anything over and above Roman color or buy anything.
I want to say, Father, it's easy to see that Dorothy is a secular priest. Because to be a secular priest, and even to remember the third order of St. Francis, and let that be known, takes a lot of courage. Because secular priests are against everything that isn't strictly secular. And affiliation to one of the great orders, in order to gain all the indulgences and privileges of that order, they cannot see. So very definitely a secular priest, in most instances, wants to keep his membership in a secular institute between him, the members of his institute, and God.
Well, I'm very much that way.
Just how quiet would you be if another priest say, "Are you a member of such and such secular institute?" Would you try to hedge on it, or would you?
In
say it was
our
outside?
diocese, I'm sure that I would use some sort of way of beating around the bush about it.
You would.
I wouldn't want it for publication, let us say, because I feel that primarily it's something for my own spiritual advancement.
Secondly, when you spoke of your vow of obedience does not include orders of the bishop. Is that correct?
Oh yes.
It does. Your vow of obedience is made in such a way that the bishop's orders are included as well as your superior.
Well, I would say that you have to obey him under the vow of obedience.
Yes, what I mean.
Oh no.
You do not. Thirdly, you talk about a conflict, and of course I've thought of this theoretical conflict likewise. What if the bishop, upon discovering you're a member, told you to drop out? I've thought of that several times, and I'm trying to figure what would I do in that case.
Well, I think then that he's like I said, as a drum major pretending he's Napoleon.
That's right, he's not supposed to, but supposing he did tell you to drop out.
Well, I think there I would pray to the Holy Ghost to have enough courage to say, well, Your Excellency, I'm afraid that that is a matter of the internal form.
All right,
Columbia?
Do I understand correctly then that your bishops do not know of your individual membership?
They don't.
That's greater discretion than we have, because we tell our bishops all
Well,
the
I think there's a distinction there for the lay people and Father, you seem to want to say something, Father Stephen.
Oh, Father Stephen's ahead of me, but I just want to say one thing. In 1958, in the month of July, on 2 occasions I had the great honor and privilege of being in the presence of Father Agostino Gemelli, who is the founder not only of the secular institutes and the missionaries of the kingship, but of the Opera della Regalità and of the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart of Milan. Father Gemelli said to me that I should inform my ordinary of my membership in the Institute. I promised Father Gemelli that when the opportune time came, I would inform my ordinary of my membership, but that I wanted permission to wait until the moment was opportune. He sent to me one time in relation to a very beloved institute which is in our archdiocese. And while I was talking about this, I said to Cardinal O'Hara, by the way, Your Eminence, I happen to be a professed member of an institute myself. Cardinal O'Hara's words were fine. Now, you'll look into this matter for me, won't you?
Dorothy? Oh, Mama came first, Dorothy, before.
Well, I refer to this international meeting on states of perfection just because it does have value for us here, since those questions were asked, among the superiors of the institutes, and the answer was given by consultants or Secretary of Congregation Bishops. When the question came up about a secular priest letting his ordinary know, the answer given was that in practice, that's the way the answer began to be given. In practice, it's a very good thing to choose an opportune time to give your ordinary that information, because once it is known, it gives you known by him. It gives greater freedom of movement and less opportunity for conflict. However, he said, according to law, it is not obligatory, because that's a private matter with a particular priest, and he's not obliged. But prudence or discretion, with prudence the better part of valor, he said, in a case like this, unless of course you expect an immediate violent reaction and expect real trouble, and wait your turn or wait your time. That's pretty much what Father Peter is referring to, the way he did it. I did have another question. I was going to ask Father Dooley about his own experience with priests of his own diocese in reference to their knowing and not knowing about your own state.
I haven't just come right out and told just everybody I belong to the Society of the Sacred Heart, but we're not exactly secretive about it. We had one of our diocesan clergy conferences on secular institutes, and I was the one chosen to give the paper. So I spoke about general secular institutes and about clerical secular institutes likewise. I think more questions came from the Archbishop than from anybody else. But he didn't say in public, are you a member? If he had, I would have said, yes. There are a good part of the priests of the diocese, good part. Yes, a good part of the priests know, for the extremely simple reason, one of our members has asked them if they would be interested in joining.
You mentioned this morning something about the retreats, about literature, how to do what?
Yes, well, the retreat house in our archdiocese is owned and operated by the Franciscan Fathers, Chicago province. And they have been They encourage any or all of our priests to join the secular institutes, clerical secular institute, and consequently, both Father Philip Markford, when he was head of the retreat house, as well as Father Gordon Canesi, who is head of it now, has encouraged us to put out our secular institute literature at retreat. It's better if a secular institute priest is on retreat with the rest, so that he can answer questions in case they come up. In connection with the last retreat, that being last August, around the time, we doubled our number. We had 5 before that and there were 10 afterwards.
In the same diocese?
In the same diocese.
Thank you, Father.
Could I ask Father Quigley a question? When you expressed your point about Cardinal O'Hara and finding the opportune moment to ask him about, or tell him about yourself and your relation to a secular institute, I gather you meant to point out that you were crushed by his apparent indifference to the whole matter.
I know,
But I meant to ask, do you suppose that his attitude was colored by the fact that he himself was ordained a member of a religious institute and was a member of the Congregation of Holy Cross even before he was a bishop, a CSC? Suppose that
I think what we really meant was this. That's fine. He had no objection to it whatsoever. I wasn't crushed at all. I was very pleased by his reaction. That's fine, he said. Will you please take care of this matter for me? In other words, he was glad. Now, this question has all been brought up because someone answering a question of a priest in either the priest or in pastoral life asked the question whether or not, and I think Scott LaRue, in his book, hints that a secular priest is bound by Canon 542, paragraph 2, and one of those numbers in there, which definitely says that a secular priest cannot join a religious community without the permission of his ordinary. But Lex Peculiaris tells us that canon law does not apply to us. Lex Peculiaris is our own canon law. And while there might be a parallelism that's strong, that we can drag 542 into the question of secular institutes.
Columbia.
Father, the discretion that is involved in the part of a priest in a secular institute, would that also be that they are a source of edification, a source of greater spirituality to their fellow priests too?
Well, yes, I think I had touched on it at least in the talk, but that is the idea, to try to get others to become interested through your good example and dropping words here and there that
to a more priestly life.
That's
just
right.
as we among the lay people try to get the lay people to be more Christian in their outlook.
That's it. Yes. Because it is most difficult for a secular priest to lead a spiritual life because there are so many irregularities in his life. He could be on calls and be dragged out at all hours of the day and night, and in a busy parish, a large city parish, he's going to have that problem. And to get some definite format into his spirituality is difficult. That is one of the advantages of the membership in a secular institute. And that's, we have to just, let us say, use camouflage to achieve that goal. Of course, we are fortunate enough to have a professor of moral theology who can get all our seminarians and really talk it up for us.
then your discretion in that relationship is the same, is for the same reason as ours.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
I was going to say, ours is not personal sanctification. Ours is
No, but
the
the apostolate towards the priest in relationship to us.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
or the apostolate.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to have personal sanctification, don't you, before you can give it to
We
the
can radiate it.
Yes.
Well, why do the other secular institutes or pious unions not have discretion?
That's a good question. You're indiscreet.
I know this is the time of the coffee break, and I just want to
This is
make
our
that is another whole question, which I don't know what the program calls for, but that that would be interesting at some time, maybe the business meeting would not be some time. Quite interesting. But by way of further corroboration about priest members of secular institutes, I'm quoting here from an actual constitution. The priest members of the institute continue to be incarnated in their own dioceses, and in no way are they to be distinguished from other priests. They preserve and respect to their own bishops all the obligations derived from their incarnation and ordination. Of course, is a type of one sacerdotալ society of priests substitute.
Can I ask one question? Are the kingship or is your institute under the obedience of the bishop of the diocese?
No, it's a. You mean is it? No, it isn't. It's not under any bishop.
Well, we're papal too, but we're also under the obedience of,
Well, see, that's a
Only as
different
a-
question. You're not an exempt. You know what exemption is in religious orders, I'm sure, don't you? That they're not under any bishop except in the things that pertain, say, to parochial life, or if there's any question of any scandal coming, the bishop as the chief shepherd to bring any religious into order, But otherwise, there's exemption. With the religious communities of women and secular institutes, they are subject to the bishop and things that pertain to their life as members of the faithful. And of course, as a kind of a supervisor, an ecclesiastical supervisor of their life as an institute, but he doesn't interfere with the Constitution.
that's the way we think it.
Just on this discussion of priest members, in our institute we have priest members, and the problem of identification is not is the same as for priests in a diocese. However, the priest, if he is asked or is given the opportunity to say what his affiliation is, would identify himself as being a member of the company. But before that, there would not be any advertising of that. He would continue whatever work he's doing until the question were brought up. But then there would be no hesitation to say what the affiliation was.
I might just observe, if I might, in regard to that the members of the Company of St. Paul are ordained according to the title of the company, whereas we are ordained under title of service to our diocese, whereas they belong to the company itself and are almost the same as a religious community. They're closer to a religious community than the secular priests who belong to the kingship. There's that difference.
Mary? And I have one question, and then we'll have the break. I'm sorry.
I think maybe, I might mention, Dorothy said why some don't have discretion.
Mary, on that
Paul
question.
wants to hold it.
Yeah, will that be all right?
Sure.
Thank you. I think that we can have a break now. Thank you.
One right after the other. Our first speaker is Sarah Ponte of the Company of St. Paul in Washington, D.C. She is a native of Argentina, and after receiving her degree in literature, she joined the Company of St. Paul in 1950. She went to Italy for 3 years of formation, and then she returned to Argentina, where she worked on one of the magazines for the Company of St. Paul. She is now superior of the laywomen's section of the company in Washington, and head of a social work program being developed by the company. The second speaker on the apostolate is Mary Hatfield, who is a member of the Missionaries of the Kingship of Christ. And Mary lives in Washington. She's a graduate nurse doing private duty here, and she's been active in Catholic Action for some time. She was with the Young Christian Workers in the League of Christian Workers, and has taught public school religion to children in the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine for several years. Mary is now doing active apostolate in her parish. So our first speaker, Sarah Ponte.
Thank you. apostolate. Since my theme is apostolate and secularity, as observed and live according to our Constitution, I am going to give first a brief definition of the Company of St. Paul. Second, what we understand by apostolate with its two forms, direct and indirect. And third, what the secular apostolate is. Finally, I will give an analysis of the apostolate of our institution according to those elements characteristic of the secular apostolate. What is the Company of St. Paul? The Company of St. Paul is a secular institute as defined by the Constitution Provida Mater Ecclesia, composed of clerics and laity, men and women, who according to the aforementioned pontifical constitutions and our own particular constitutions, duly organized and in common life, profess in the world their total consecration to God and the full dedication to the apostolate. In this definition of the Company of St. Paul, given in Article 3 of our Constitution, we find elements that are common to all secular institutes approved by Holy Mother the Church in accordance with the pontifical documents. These elements are as follows. The Company of St. Paul is formed by secular people, clerics and laity. They are hierarchically organized. They live a common life, not canonical life. They consecrate their total life to God in the world. They dedicate themselves wholly to the apostolate. Of these 5 elements, I am interested only in 2, the secular character of our institute and the full dedication to the apostolate. But I want to remark that it will be assumed that apostolate as lived in the secular institutes will not be possible without a total consecration to God, and that there is an intimate, intrinsic relationship between both, as expressed by Prima Feliciter when it says, "The thirst and zeal for souls seem not only to have happily provided the opportunity for a life of consecration, but for a large extent to have imposed their own essence and form on this life of consecration, and in a wonderful manner to have called forth and created that end which is named specific or even generic." From the above definition, it is clear that the generic aim of the Company of St. Paul is the total consecration to God in the world, and that the specific aim is the apostolate. This is true for all the secular institutes. Article 4 of our Constitution, discussing our specific aim, says, "The Company of St. Paul wants to collaborate in devout dependence on the ecclesiastical hierarchy in the establishment of the social kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ, with an apostolate of total penetration of the Christian life, in the modern individual life, and principally collective life, in all aspects and fields, family, professional, social, and political life." This apostolate, speaking in the strict sense of the word, is the same for every member of the company, that is, for clerics and lay people. The classic definition of apostolate says that apostolate is the activity with which the Christian as such, that is, as baptized and confirmed, contributes in some way and some degree to communicate, maintain, restore, and develop in others the knowledge of supernatural truth, of supernatural perfection, and of the life of grace. Apostolate then is the continuation of the work of Jesus Christ, so every Christian becomes a co-redeemer with him. It is in this sense that the apostolate is the same for all the Paulians. Louis Lafayette has found a new way of expressing this mission to which every Christian is entitled. In his article, Union with God, he says that the apostolate of the priest in his parish, of the teacher in his school, or of of a Christian in his environment does not consist in doing this or that, but rather in obtaining from God grace for that environment. To save sinners is to obtain from God the grace of their conversion, which is God's free gift. The thing they have to do is to attract the grace for the sinners. Apostolate means to live in such a way as to attract the grace of God for their social environment, just as lightning rods on top of houses attract lightning during a storm. I say that apostolate is the same for every member of the company of St. Paul. Regarding the means, some are exclusively for the priests, others are proper to the lay people. As to the form, the direct apostolate is usually that of the priest, and the indirect is usually that of the laity. Direct apostolate works on the soul directly in order to enlighten, support, and awaken with Christian vigor all those who are in need of that help. Indirect apostolate is concerned with action, that is, temporal activities. By temporal activities, I mean the professional, social, civil, and political activities in which the common people are engaged. The Paulians will use these temporal activities as means to arrive at the souls of persons in their social environment. The indirect apostolate tries to accomplish insofar as possible the temporal activities in accordance with the Christian view, that is, to withdraw them from the midst of the three concupiscences and to restore them to their authentic function as merely intermediate means directed to the ultimate aim, the freedom to be children of God and to act accordingly. The starting point of the Paulian apostolate is testimony. That means to live a Christian-like life, a long Christ-like life, alongside their neighbors, sanctifying temporal activities and making their own work a valid instrument of apostolate in the sense of person and social environment, so as to restore all things in Christ. They will obtain their aim in proportion to the technical and moral excellence of their work. In fact, any religious exhortation addressed to their neighbor will be much more effective if, first of all, they have established themselves competent in their professional field. Perfecting professional competence is of such great value in reaching their neighbor that not even all the good intentions in the world can substitute for it. Because of this, the Company of St. Paul requires of its members the cultivation of professional training until they reach full competence, in order that their apostolate may be effective and thus become a useful instrument. The indirect apostolate occupies by necessity the greater part of the time of the laity in the general sense. If they do not fulfill it, nobody will. Therefore, it represents their particular function in the world, in the church. By a special vocation of the Holy Spirit, this function has been reinforced by the consecrated lay people, so the multiple human activities may be channeled according to the plans of God, and so they may prepare the environment that the Word of God may bear fruit. There are two things that are necessary in the redemption of temporal activities: the natural capacity to work in that particular field, and the help of grace, so that the apostolate may be preserved from the temptations which can waylay the workers from their true aim. So, Holy Mother of the Church expects from the members of secular institutes to be the ever-fresh salt of an earth which has lost its savor and is shrouded in darkness, a world to which they do not belong and in which, by divine will, they must nevertheless remain. Let us turn now from the general concept of apostolate to that of secular apostolate. What is secular? Secular life is that which is developed in the world and is distinguished from regular or religious life, as this is developed separated from the world. We call secular the persons, clerics and lay, who are not religious and who live as a consequence secular life. So secular apostolate is above all the apostolate that is accomplished in the midst of the world by persons who live a secular life, persons who are engaged in temporal activities and whose life is identical with the life of common people. In the strict juridical sense and according to the classification of canonic persons containing Canon 107 of the Code of Canonical Rights, secular apostolate is that apostolate accomplished by clerics and laity who are not religious. The concept of the secular apostolate, so far as it is accomplished in the secular institute, is determined by the following. First, by the persons who carry it out, inasmuch as they are secular and not religious. By the place in which is carried on the aforementioned apostolate, in the midst of worldly civil society. By the social realities which are held up as the goal of the secular apostolate, family, profession, exercise of civil rights and duties, etc. By the environment which penetrates where it is prohibited to religious and priests. By the secular ways and means which are used to accomplish this apostolate, answering in full the condition of secular institutes. Now I am going to elaborate in particular on each of these 5 categories as they have bearing on the Company of St. Paul. Regarding persons, the Company of St. Paul is composed of clerics and laity, who have not lost their canonical personality as non-religious in the Church, thus keeping the right to live in the world and to exercise the professions and activities that are proper to secular persons. The place where the Paulians accomplished their apostolate is the world. Article 12 of our constitutions, treating of the apostolate of the laymen section, says that by reason of their vocation, they are called to participate fully in the public social life. And Article 104 says that the company will prefer to develop its program of apostolate in the large cities. As of today, the activities of the company are centered in the midst of such large cities as Rome, Milan, Paris, London, Buenos Aires, Montevideo, Santiago, Washington, and other large cities of Italy and Argentina. The social realities that the company has as its aim are cited in the above-mentioned article, which says that the company of St. Paul exercises an apostolate of total penetration of the Christian life in the modern individual life and principally collective life in all aspects and fields, family, professional, social, and political life. The Paulian apostolate is aimed at the family through courses of preparation for matrimony, as also through the family service in Milan, which offers counseling and all the necessary help in the problems of intra-family relationships. There are 2 magazines as well that are exclusively edited for the family. The professional field, we can say it is the broadest in the company, with the individual or group apostolate. There are physicians, lawyers, teachers, social workers, nurses, journalists, psychiatrists, who exercise their profession in the midst of society like any other layman. Others have been designed by the superiors to direct the different social works of the company. In the political field, there are Paulians. The Paulians are also called to exercise their apostolate. There is, for example, a member of the layman section in Italy since 15 years ago who is a congressman. Fourth, the environment that the Paulians penetrate on an individual level is generally close to the religious. Article 12, already cited, says that the members are called to carry on all apostolate that for some reason is prohibited to the priest, to prepare humbly and generously the clerical apostolate in those surroundings of modern society which reject the religious. Paulians accomplish this, for instance, through teaching in public schools or directing, as the case is in Buenos Aires, a journalism school of which the majority of the students are liberal or communist. The ways and means are also secular. Article 5 of our Constitution affirms the method to use for bringing about this special goal, apostolate, are those most efficacious and most suited to each moment and each country, even those most new and daring. In paragraph B of the same article, it speaks of the most common forms of the apostolate in the company, which are the following: the apostolate of the living word, just as well as that of the written word in all its forms, news, movies, radio. The living word at this moment is actively employed by the company by means of numerous conferences and courses on various topics, family, professional, cultural. Likewise, the written word by means of articles and the 7 magazines edited by the company on such topics as philosophy, theology, literature, education, fashion, and culture. Some of the forms of apostolate in the company are as follows. Some are already mentioned. The apostolate of cultural, social, redemptive, and assistential action. The apostolate of professional or specialized activity, above all for the lay sections. The apostolate of the collaboration in public, moral, cultural, artistic, and economic life of the times, and in Catholic, national, and international movements. As a conclusion, we can say that the aim of secular apostolate is to restore the world according to the plan of God, establishing it in justice and peace through a full testimony, alive and effective, shown by faithfulness in this task of restoring everything in Christ.
Sarah, for your interest in talking to the apostle. Mary Hatfield.
That's too high for you, Mary, it's so...
No, it's all right, Father. I can see everybody there. This is the secularity in the apostolate of the missionaries of the kingship of Christ. The apostolate of secular institutes is to be faithfully practiced not only in the world, but as of the world, and therefore with avowed aims, practices, forms, and in places and circumstances corresponding to this secular condition. In these words of the Motu Proprio Primo Feliciter of Pope Pius XII, you see clearly the source of the distinctive characteristic of secularity in relation to the apostolate of secular institutes. It is to be practiced in the world, meaning in a secular or lay society and environment, to distinguish it from the apostolate of religious, which for the most part is either restricted to the convents
as among contemplative religious, or exercised in secular society to a very limited degree under the church auspices as among the religious of the active orders and congregations. The apostolate of secular institute is also of the world, that is, it pertains to the temporal order. The temporal order is the special sphere of influence of the layman, just as the spiritual order is more especially entrusted to the clerical state. The aims of the apostolate referred to by the motu proprio are to sanctify the temporal order, that is, to recognize it as established by God and as a means to lead man to his eternal destiny. To understand this aim, it is necessary to recognize the sacredness of all things created, to see in them the reflection of the goodness and the power of God, and to use created things and help others to use them to serve God and one's fellow man. Perhaps the aim of the apostolate through its characteristic of secularity might be more effectively demonstrated by an experience at the International Congress of Young Christian Workers held in Montreal in 1947. One phase of the week-long program was to be a solemn pontifical mass in the spacious McGill Stadium in Montreal. The stadium began to be filled with conventioners, young Christian workers, as the time for Mass approached. One startling feature, however, was the fact that there seemed to be no immediate preparation for the Mass, such as the altar and its many furnishings, necessary to offer even a low Mass, not to speak of the additional instruments required for a solemn pontifical Mass. We thought at first that we had erred concerning the time of the Mass. As the presumed time arrived, however, a long procession was seen to enter the stadium and to advance to the center. Instead of the usual cassocked altar boys and sacred ministers, there was a long line of working young men and women, dressed in working attire, each carrying some object which he had made by his own industry, and which was necessary for the performance of the sacred liturgy. There were young men who were farmers, carrying the wheat and the grapes, silver and gold, bearing the sacred utensils, carpenters carrying wood for the altar, wood carvers, young women carrying woven linens for the altar, others carrying the sacred vestments for the ministry. A dramatic presentation of how necessary is the temporal and secular order of things to make possible the spiritual. When at last the clerical attendants and then the high priest and shepherd of the diocese reached the platform, the sacredness of material things, the gifts made by lay men and women, became abundantly apparent. They were to be consecrated by God's priest into useful service for the august sacrifice of the Mass. The necessary service and cooperation of the laity in the sacred ministry of the hierarchy, in giving all honor and glory to God, was the lesson learned on that occasion, never to be forgotten. The temporal order, the sphere of the layman's influence, is made up of many institutions to be conquered for Christ. Family life is sanctified when a member of the family, dedicated to God, uses the familiar atmosphere of the home and the ties of flesh and blood to create a spirit of harmony and cooperation. Peacemaker, dispenser of charity when it is needed, countless little services to parents, sisters and brothers, above all, the shining example of true Christian conduct. These are the apostolic roles to be accomplished in the parental home of a missionary of the kingship of Christ. In the professions, competence is a requisite, both for the usefulness of a missionary service and for the greater opportunity it affords for influencing the respective profession in applying Christian principles and in causing them to be applied. A competent Christian lawyer will find constant opportunity for applying the virtues of justice and charity. Active membership in Catholic Lawyers' Guilds and in the National Men and Women's Bar Association will afford more than ample opportunity for exerting Christian influence on the moral life of civil society in our country. The nurse who is a missionary will know how to combine joy and gladness with skill in her service, a tactful word of faith and comfort for the patient's soul, while administering healing medicines for the restoration of his body. The secretary will know how to combine foresight, neatness, and precision in her work with cheerfulness, a spirit of sacrifice and charity that will exemplify the Christian spirit within her and stimulate others toward emulation of her virtues. The housekeeper will combine the daily, monotonous, and seemingly trivial duties of service with a supernatural spirit of dedication that will relate these services more directly and immediately to Christ, her King, to whom she thus gives the strength of her body, the power of her mind, and the love of her heart. Besides the apostolate within the family circle and in the environment of her special field of work, the missionary pursues a further apostolate through Catholic action. Whatever be the form of Catholic action in her diocese, there is the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, the Legion of Mary, the Young Christian Workers or students. The missionary assumes her role of leader or follower as required by him who represents the office of bishop and shepherd of the diocese. The means of carrying out such an apostolate in the world must always be supernatural. Penance through unselfishness, self-denial, sacrifice. Charity through recognition of Christ in her fellow man, regardless of whether he appears as the suffering Christ or the merciful Christ showing compassion on the multitude. Absence of uniform, emblem, or badge makes the apostolate as broad as secular society, but it also deprives it of public honor, glory, and praise, which the missionary of the kingship gladly forgoes to establish the kingdom in greater interior depth than in possible outward display of self. To give greater glory to her king, she will seek the opportunity and the means of using the instruments of the world, such as newspapers, television, amusements, literature, and conversation, to bring about a greater knowledge and respect for Christian principles. To do this, she in turn will take advantage of the opportunities to learn not only the truths of her faith, but the moral doctrines which should control and guide daily life. This missionary spirit will become so much a part of her that she will look on the whole world as her mission field. There will be little time for loneliness or self-pity, and should she sometimes be tempted to indulge in these states, she should recall that she is not alone. Though she does not share in community life, the ideals to which she adheres form a bond that unite her to fellow missionaries throughout the world. Her greatest source of consolation is her fidelity to prayer. Here she can find rest when weary and renewed strength for greater conquest. She is concerned about many souls. Here she can speak freely and know that he to whom she speaks is even more intent on these souls than she. Through liturgical prayer, she feels at one with the whole body of Christ. It is only through this union with her Eucharistic King that the missionary's apostolate will be effective. In the clear light of truth which is revealed to the faithful soul, she will more readily perceive the obstacles which stand in her way and which often prevent the effective working of grace in the soul. Through the divine reflection which others will see in her, more souls will be drawn to know and love God. She must persevere in firm faith, selfless love, and courage.